Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Portage-Lisgar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I rise today to speak against the motion that is before us today. It's not a complicated motion, but it certainly is a misleading motion, and it really runs counter to the testimony that we heard before the Standing Committee on Public Safety in regards to Bill C-391. There are a number of reasons why I believe that this motion needs to be defeated. The primary reason I'm going to begin with, Mr. Speaker, is the need for my bill and this issue to come before members of Parliament who represent Canadians.
Without being wet.
Mr. Speaker, this is an issue that Canadians have been watching for the last 15 years, and we know that even over the last several months and weeks, Canadians have been on both sides of this issue looking to see what the arguments are for pro-registry and against registry. But, Mr. Speaker, it is time for members of Parliament to stand in their place and to vote either to scrap the Long Gun Registry or to keep it. What this motion does, Mr. Speaker, is it actually stops debate on the Long Gun Registry. So the first reason that I think that the motion needs to be defeated is so that we can proceed with this bill and it can be voted on by all the members of Parliament and they can represent their constituents' wishes.
We don't know anything about that.
Mr. Speaker, as I've been traveling around the ridings throughout northwestern Ontario, throughout the Yukon, throughout Canada, and as I listen to testimony at the Standing Committee, there are a number of myths that have been perpetuated in regards to the Long Gun Registry. And those myths, thankfully, are being dispelled and have been dispelled through testimony that we heard. One of the first myths is that police officers check the Long Gun Registry 11,000 times a day. Now, Mr. Speaker, there are the facts, but sometimes the facts don't actually tell the truth of the story. The fact is probably the registry, the whole entire Canadian firearms database is checked probably between 8,000 to 11,000 times a day. But that does not constitute police officers purposefully and going in to directly check the Long Gun Registry. What that means, Mr. Speaker, is that police database systems are set up to automatically check the registry anytime they even pull someone over to check a license plate. So if somebody is speeding, if their taillight is broken, if they have to pull someone over, across this country, what happens when they put in their vehicle license plate, it automatically hits the firearms registry. If there's any kind of activity going on the registry, if somebody purchases, registers a firearm, if staff go into the registry, it registers a hit. So, Mr. Speaker, the truth is not that police officers are looking at the registry and making tactical decisions based on the information, because it's happening automatically. And I'm just going to quote the chief of the Ottawa Police Department, Vern White. He said, when you look at the automatic checks, to me, he said, that is not an actual check of the system. And I think it's important that police realize that. Why don't we actually speak truthfully about what police are doing and if they are using the registry? One of the reasons they told us that they don't use it is because they actually can't depend on the information that's in the registry. According to the RCMP evaluation that has been quoted and discussed, of all of the firearms that are acquired and confiscated in the commission of a crime, only 46% of those long guns are actually registered. We know there are about 6.5 million long guns registered right now in the database. There are probably twice that amount of long guns in Canada. So we know, and police officers have told us, that when they go on a call, they don't believe the information in the registry. Now, they believe the information in the licensing part of the database. If they see if somebody has a possession and acquisition license or a possession-only license, that gives them an indication if there possibly could be firearms. One of the important things to note is if a person has a license to possess a firearm, they have registered long guns, they don't have to store them at their house. They can legally store them somewhere else. And so police know that. Maybe some members of Parliament don't know that, but police know that. And so when they go on a call, they are not looking at the registry and believing that if the registry says, well, there are 2 firearms, then we'll believe there are 2 firearms, find those 2, and then believe we're safe. Absolutely not. I'm going to quote Chief Bob Rich. He's chief of the Abbotsford Police Department. He said, "It is my firm belief that the registry is horrifically inaccurate. I talked to my investigators and I talked to my gun expert, And in story after story, whenever they've tried to use it, the information in it is all wrong. He said, so I find my investigators actually don't rely on the registry. And he said, I think a flawed system is worse than any system. Sergeant Dwayne Rutledge, who is head of emergency response in Nova Scotia, he said it's an unreliable system. In other words, I have no hesitation in saying that, in my opinion, the Long Gun Registry does not help police stop violence or make these communities safer from violence. And there is no evidence that it has ever saved a single life on its own merit. Mr. Speaker, we heard from the Chief of Police from the Calgary Police Department. Calgary, we know, is one of the major cities in Canada. They have a lot of challenges and things that they deal with in gun crime. The Chief of the Calgary Police Department, Rick Hansen, said unequivocally he does not support the Long Gun Registry. Again, police can't count on the information. It's a partial database. It's an unreliable database. What they are looking at is the licensing information. Does somebody have the potential to own a firearm? So that myth, Mr. Speaker, was dispelled. It has been dispelled. We know frontline officers don't use the registry. They have flooded us, all of us, overwhelmingly, with emails, phone calls, support. Some of the strongest supporters of my bill, I'm proud to say, are frontline police officers. Another myth, Mr. Speaker, is the cost of the Long Gun Registry. Now, we know the Auditor General told us that it cost almost $1 billion to set up. Some of the estimates are upwards of $2 billion. But let's just look at the current costs. Let's look at the current costs. We know, Mr. Speaker, that right now the cost to implement the registry is about $68 million, and that only takes into account the federal portion of the costs. One of the things that nobody talks about is the cost to provincial and municipal governments. Now, provinces are the ones that are left administering police services, unless it's the RCMP. Police in provinces and municipalities are the ones that have to go out and make sure that the registry is actually complied with. They're the ones that are using their resources to compile the information. Who has a license? Who has a registration? Cross-reference. Did someone miss a paper, filling out a paper somewhere? And then they have to go, knock on these people's doors, and tell them that they have broken a paper law. What they're not finding are drug dealers, gangsters, people who are committing crimes with firearms. They are spending their precious time, their precious resources, tracking down people who are using their firearms for legitimate purposes. What is the cost to those police officers, to those municipalities, and to the provinces? The Canadian Taxpayers Federation says just to maintain the registry is approximately $106 million. But I am suggesting that if we look at what it would cost to register the 7 million plus long guns that are still out there, Mr. Speaker, I'm worried it costs $2 billion to register 6.5 million long guns. What's it going to cost to register another 7 million long guns? You know, did we hear this back? Was it 15 years ago? The Long Gun Registry will only cost $2 million, and it costs $2 billion. Now we're hearing only $4 million. Does that mean it might cost $4 billion to actually carry it out and make it accurate? I think Canadians overwhelmingly want to see the money go towards fighting crime, criminal activity, putting criminals in jail. The other myth, Mr. Speaker, is that the Long Gun Registry protects women and that it stops domestic violence and suicide. Mr. Speaker, I think that is one of the most misleading and inaccurate statements that has been used in this argument. Mr. Speaker, emergency doctors are dealing with suicide. They're dealing with people who are coming to their hospitals wounded, sometimes by accidents. Mr. Speaker, police are dealing with issues of domestic violence. Where we can actually have an impact to make sure that people don't get guns who should not have guns is in the licensing process. That's where they are screened. That's where they are stopped from getting a gun. They go through a background check. Mr. Speaker, that's an important process. We need to make sure it's strong. But once they have a gun, spending between $106 million and $2 billion to count their guns does nothing to stop violence. We need programs in place to help families. We need programs in place to help men and women who are dealing with depression, with family crisis, with young people who are at risk for drug and gang activity. Mr. Speaker, I hope and I'm asking that all members of this House vote against this motion. I'm asking that members from the NDP stand on principle, stand on what they have said to their constituents time after time again. I'm asking that members from the Yukon, the member from the Yukon stands up for his constituents. Vote against this motion. Let 391 go through and let's kill this long gun registry.